Down the ditches 1,000 years, the waters grew Ira's people's crops, till the white man stole their water rights and the sparkling waters stopped.
Throughout our education, we have learned about the horrific acts white settlers committed towards Native Americans. From smallpox blankets to the Trail of Tears, our forefathers' thirst for conquest devastated each and every tribe. However, apart from simply destroying the people, these conquests have waged a war on the very culture that binds those people together. Racism and prejudice led the settlers to see Native Americans not as a unique people, but as simple savages. So, in an incredibly misguided manner, white settlers not only took Native American lives and land, but they forced Native Americans to assimilate to European standards. Perhaps the most blatant example of this cultural assimilation was written by a reformist senator from Massachusetts in 1887.
The Dawes Act of 1887 authorized the government to break up and distribute Native American land individually. Fueled by American belief that the Native Americans were a primal, uncivilized group, along with the desire to assimilate them into the American culture, this act was meant to eradicate the culture and traditions of the Native Americans. This was done through giving the plots of lands to individuals, which broke up tribal affiliations and treated them as individuals rather as a collective whole. Not only did this force them apart, it also enforced that they must take on farming. If they failed to do so, they would not be able to sell the land back, and it would go to the federal government for sale, usually to white settlers. This resulted in the loss of over 90 million acres of Native American land, sold off to the white Americans under unfair and unjust laws. This added into a negative cycle, as the Native American children were sent to boarding schools, where they learned everything in English, and Christianity was forced upon them. There, they would forget their native tongue and not see their families for years. The loss of land, children, and tribes ultimately led to the breaking of a culture to forced assimilation.
Now Ira's folks were hungry, and their land grew crops of weeds. When war came, Ira volunteered and forgot the white man's greed.
Cultural trauma occurs when members of a group feel that they have been subjected to a horrendous event that is in their memories forever and changes their future identity completely. Cultural trauma is caused through various reasons in Leslie Marmon Silko's book, Ceremony, but specifically through assimilating into the white culture. As shown in historical context, when assimilating into the white culture, one loses their cultural identity. The war veterans in Ceremony experiences this trauma. They lost the connection to their culture in the process of fighting in the war that does not concern them. That includes Rocky and many other Native American veterans like Emo and Harley, who later subjects to alcohol and white women in order to forget their traumatic experiences in the war. Rocky, as the expected son who will bring fortune and hope to the family, he wanted to be accepted by the white society because Rocky was taught from an early age that it was the only way to be successful. In order to do that, assimilating into the white culture and forgetting his own culture through boarding school will be his only way out. Through boarding school, Rocky learned to believe that the Native American culture is nonsense. Rocky stopped practicing the old-time ways because the feeling of superstition in his culture was too much. Believing that becoming like white people, it will result in acceptance into the white culture. Therefore, he signs up for the army. This only proves to show his desperation to leave his culture behind and appeal to the white culture because he was seeking the same acceptance from society like the American soldiers did. Rocky thought that he could win in the white outside world, to be assimilated into the white culture, yet as to what happened after only proved to show that his assimilation into the white culture had resulted to the destruction of himself.
But he was just a Pima Indian. No water, no home, no chance. At home, nobody cared what Ira had done, and when did the Indians dance?
After the war, all the Native American veterans experienced trauma that changed their lives drastically. The American soldier uniform had treated them with first class, assuring their acceptance and a place in the American society, only to have that stripped away after the war ended, leaving the veterans deserted and reliant on alcohol to cope with their feelings and what they went through. The feelings developed a drinking habit that makes them sink the loss in booze. From the position of this high place in society to be brought down again, doing the opposite of what Tayo did, which is to heal himself. The rest of them felt ashamed that they were a Native American veteran. Their exclusion after the war also impacted the views of their Native American identities. It only leaves them with recollecting memories of their traumatic experiences, only they had turned it into heroic war stories. The influence of white culture has made Emo ashamed of his own Native American identity. Emo tried to appeal to the white culture by taking an American woman to make sure that he is still a part of the culture after the war. Emo still desires to be a part of this white culture, despite his hatred towards the white people for taking away Native American land. But what he doesn't realize is his dangerous desires to become white and be a part of the white culture only leads him to the rejection of his true Native American identity and the hatred for his friends. Silko's message of ceremony is that through the act of assimilating into the white culture, it only leads to the creation of hatred to one's true self-identity and culture. What the veterans thought could bring them up only leads them to being ashamed of who they are, not knowing how to cope with this trauma and shame they subject to alcohol and acts of violence.
Call him drunken Ira Hayes, he won't answer anymore. Not the whiskey drinking Indian or the Marine that went to war.
The main character of Ceremony, Tayo, also drank heavily to forget the cultural trauma he endured in the war. Most of the veterans, like Emo, tried their best to look back on that time fondly. Emo loved to explain how he had scored with 2 white women and was great at butchering every Jap he found. Tayo had no patience for this nostalgia and reminded Emo that when the military uniform was gone, all of a sudden that man at the store waited on you last and discrimination reappeared. Tayo saw that any wartime acceptance the veterans had found in white culture was a veneer. Discrimination towards Native Americans had never truly faded. In response to this, Tayo went on a quest to heal his cultural trauma. He drew inspiration from his uncle's spotted cattle, a mix of desert cattle and white culture's Hereford cattle. Purebred Hereford cattle will wait by a dry watering hole until they die. In contrast, the mixed spotted cattle do not wait and instead seek out what they need. Tayo knew his native culture was in the midst of difficulty. Many people like Emo were abandoning the culture to become like Hereford cattle at a dry watering hole. When it suited them, white culture filled that watering hole and gave Native Americans a higher status. After the war ended, the water disappeared. While Emo waited expectantly for water, Tayo did as the spotted cattle would do and moved on. Tayo did not ignore systemic discrimination. He saw it and refused to be bound by it. Just as the spotted cattle were willing to look for water, Tayo searched for his culture in everything around him. He was not reliant on either white culture or his Laguna Pueblo traditions. If one culture denied him acceptance, Tayo could receive it from the other. Finding independence from the grip of total assimilation helped Tayo to relieve his cultural trauma. Ever since the arrival of the first white settlers, the history of Native Americans has been a struggle to preserve the very traditions that make them who they are. Their assimilation into white culture, accelerated by initiatives like the Dawes Act, created severe cultural trauma. This is what Leslie Marmon Silko portrayed in Ceremony when she wrote about the Native American veterans of World War II. Seeing no path forward within their own culture, these Native Americans tried to assimilate into white culture, participating in a war that hardly concerned them. After the war, they were again denied acceptance by white culture, and so they felt intense shame for their Native American identity. These destructive emotions demonstrate the inescapable truth of cultural assimilation, that no matter how hard these veterans try, they will never be seen as good enough because they will never be white enough. This lack of acceptance is the cause of their cultural trauma. However, one veteran broke free. Drawing inspiration from the spotted cattle, Tayo saw the faults of total assimilation and learned to move on to other sources of acceptance. Finding this acceptance and ridding himself of the shame he felt towards his identity, Tayo walked the path towards healing cultural trauma.
Ira Hayes, Ira Hayes, call him drunken Ira Hayes, he won't answer anymore. Not the whiskey drinking Indian, nor the Marine that went to war. Gather round me, people, there's a story I would tell about a brave young Indian you should remember well. From the land of the Pima Indian, a proud and noble band who farmed the Phoenix Valley in Arizona land. Down their ditches 1,000 years, the waters grew Ira's people's crops, till the white man stole their water rights and the sparkling water stopped. Now Ira's folks were hungry, and their land grew crops of weeds. When war came, Ira volunteered and forgot the white man's greed. Call him drunken Ira Hayes, he won't answer anymore. Not the whiskey drinking Indian, nor the Marine that went to war. There they battled up Iwo Jima Hill, 250 men, but only 27 lived to walk back down again. And when the fight was over, and Old Glory raised among the men who held it high,